Imagine a mirror, a surface into which you may gaze upon and see reflected only your darkest inner thoughts, every single physical flaw and mental detriment. The grotesque, unrecognizably monstrous creature looking back at you is what Carl Jung referred to as the shadow self. In my speech, we will be discussing the shadow self in three different ways. First, the shadow in mythology. Second, a comparison between the shadow in mythology and how it refers to psychology. And third, the shadow in psychology. Carl Jung, in his book Unconscious Consciousness, identified the shadow as the hidden, repressed yet inferior side of ourselves, capable of reprehensible tendencies and guilt-ridden. This side of ourself is the one that we most often ignore and contains the traits that we view as being undesirable, things about ourselves that we repress or push down and ignore. The more they are ignored, the more strength they gain as we do not work on improving these qualities. This brings us to our first part, the shadow in mythology. The shadow appears throughout ancient folklore, and its presence in myth points at mankind's self-awareness of a dark inner self. The German doppelganger or double-goer is an apparition of a living person. Encyclopedia Britannica says that the concept of the existence of a spirit double, an exact but usually invisible replica of every man, woman, or beast, is an ancient and widespread belief. But why is this belief so widespread, even from ancient times? Does it perhaps have a parallel in our psychological shadows? Those who were said to see their doppelgangers were often visited upon by doom of some sort. Does viewing our shadow selves bring us to a point of doom upon recognizing that within ourselves are truly undesirable qualities? In Egyptian myth, the goddess of light, Isis, had a shadow twin, Nephthys, and the shadow side of the moon in astrology is often called Lilith, in opposition to the light side of the moon, Eve. These two stories tell of polar opposites existing side by side, much like a person and their shadow. This brings us to part 2, a comparison. In the psychological teachings of Carl Jung, the shadow is an archetype of collective unconsciousness. The collective unconsciousness, in turn, psych expert Kendra Cherry mentions, is a unique belief in that Jung believed that the part of our mind served as a form of shared psychological traits. In other words, the idea, the concept that we all gain psychological traits from our ancestors, passed down generation to generation in much the same way that folklore and mythology are shared. What do these shared psychological traits tell us? It raises an interesting viewpoint, though, in that the idea that we might gain traits also brings to mind the idea that we might gain shadow traits. Instead of only inheriting good qualities such as faith, compassion, kindness, generosity, we might also inherit more horrible things from our ancestors. Could the ancestors of a murderer inherit the bloodlust of their ancestor? Could the descendants of a thief inherit the greed of their ancestor? These questions are thought-provoking, if nothing more. This brings us to part 3, the shadow in psychology. Psychology today has this to say on the matter. The shadow is the most destructive, insidious, and dangerous when repressed and projected. In other words, acting out or denying our worst impulses only causes them to grow worse. Does this not make sense? Ignoring the bad things that exist within ourselves causes them to worsen. We could be working on these qualities and trying to improve them. Instead, by ignoring them, they only continue to worsen. Makes good sense, no? This raises a question, however. Is our shadow a friend, a reflective mirror that we can look into and use to critique ourselves, to better ourselves? Or is it a wicked trickster, that devil sitting on our shoulder, whispering in our ear? In conclusion, just because the shadow self contains our darkest traits does not mean that it need be our enemy. Carl Jung had this to say in his work The Red Book: knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people. Knowing about our shadows can provide us with a good weapon against the darkness of other people. Let us face our own shadow self and grow the stronger for it.